All right guys, you ever have one of those projects where you put a bunch of time into it, put all the new parts on, do everything right, and the results just suck? Well, that's where I'm at on this truck. We did 2-inch drop spindles on the front, and you can see there's still a lot of wheel well gap. And I even put taller tires on it to try to see if that would help, but it just didn't drop as much as I thought. But the bigger issue is this thing rides like a brick. Now here are the springs that came out of it. I assume they're the factory 4-cylinder Dakota springs, but they're nasty and I'm not sure what's going on there. So I found that you could buy aftermarket replacement springs for a 4-cylinder truck, so that's what I did. So in here we got Mevotech springs, and they're supposed to be for a 4-cylinder Dakota, but like I said, this thing rides like they're way too stiff. And a little research showed me that factory 4-cylinder Dakota springs are supposed to be around 460-pound springs. Turns out those Mevotechs are 716. Now you can see the issue there. We got over 250 more pounds of spring in the front of this truck than there's supposed to be. So that explains why the front end of this thing rides like crap. Now I could clean these up and throw those back in and we should be fine, but what's the fun in that? And I'm sure the factory springs would probably lower it a little bit because they're softer, but we're gonna try these out. Well, these are eBay's finest F-body front coilovers. So they're meant for Camaro Trans Am, but turns out these will fit right into the Dakota with no modifications. Now, these come with a 500-pound spring, which yeah, is a little stiffer than the factory 4-cylinder Dakota spring, but still way softer than what is in there. So a little stiffer spring, and we can lower it a little more. I think that's a win. Now, another thing we're gonna do is ditch all the energy suspension poly bushings in the control arms and the leaf springs. I know, call me crazy, but I just don't think it needs it. In my mind, when I was putting the truck together, I thought, why not? Let's do energy suspension bushings everywhere. But again, this is a street truck. We're just cruising around, having fun in it. I don't think poly bushings are necessary. So I got a set of factory, just rubber replacement bushings for the control arms that we'll throw in once all that stuff is apart. Now, obviously that spring is under a lot of tension. Even if you put a jack under the control arm to undo one of your ball joint nuts, there's so much pressure under that spring that when you undo that, it's going to actually lift the truck off your jack stands. So we need to get a spring compressor in there, and this is what we're going to use. We're just going to slide this in there and hook one of these hooks on the back side of the spring. All right, got that spring compressor in there, got a little tension on it, and you can see I just have it hooked on the back coil here. We don't have anything on the front because this spring sits like this in there in a curve, not straight. So if you grab both sides, once you relieve tension, that spring's gonna wanna straighten out and kick forward. So we just got on the back side, got a jack under the control arm just for added security. We're gonna do the lower ball joint nut and separate it there, and hopefully it all goes smoothly and we don't have an explosion. All right, so far so good. Got the ball joint separated, so we can lower the jack and get the spring out of there. All right, spring is out. Now that wasn't too bad. Typically putting them back in is the more difficult part. So if you want to know how to do that, I have a video that shows the technique to get those springs back in there the proper way and not have any problems. So I'm going to bust out these bushings and the control arms real quick, and then we'll pick up with the coilovers. All right guys, I chickened out. Keeping the poly bushings in the control arms for now. We're just going to do the coilovers. It's too much work. It's like 100 degrees out, so let's just do the coilovers, and maybe that'll make it better. At least good enough. So I got the coilovers next to the Mevotech springs that we took out of there, and I got them close. Basically the spring sits in the control arm right there, and this is going to bolt to the bottom of the control arm. So we got our lengths pretty much the same, but I expect these to compress more than those. We can always go lower if we need to, or raise it up obviously. So let's throw these in. Now I'm not the first guy to put coilovers on a 1st-gen Dakota, but a lot of the aftermarket ones, like the name brands, this is too big to mount like a factory shock underneath the control arm, so you'll have to mount them on top. But these will mount just like a factory shock in here. Then you can see I got the factory spring seat on the coilover spring. All right, I got enough threads through the frame for the nut to go on top of the shock. And it was kind of a pain because obviously, like I mentioned before, the factory spring sits in here like in a curve. So as you trying to push this up, the shock is wanting to point towards us. So I had to go in here between the spring and the shock assembly and pry it that way towards the engine as I jacked up with the jack to get that in there. So now I'm going to release the pressure of the jack and try to get the bottom bolts started. All right, you can see my setup here. I got a strap on the frame wrapped around the coilover, pulling it inboard so that these bottom bolts line up. You got to do something similar with stock springs also, so nothing new here. Now I can get the bottom bolts in. All right, first coilovers in, and it wasn't too bad. Not any worse than putting factory springs in there. So as far as adjusting those, I have no idea how that's going to go. That spring is under a lot of tension. These did not come with any kind of wrench, and there's no slots in there. So I'm not sure how that's going to go. Obviously, lowering it will be way easier than trying to raise it. So let's just hope that it's perfect right there. All right, both sides done. So let's lower it down and see how it looks. All right, right off the bat, the gap is pretty much the same as it was, but since those springs are a lot softer, it may settle. So next thing we need to do is take it out and see if it settles, and more importantly, how it feels. All right, out driving the Dakota after the coilovers, and it's way, way better. Definitely a lot smoother, less harsh. It's still stiff, but